All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about Design Sprint, kind of giving you the 101 tips and tricks today. We'll start off with a quick intro to myself. My name is JL Lum. I am the experienced design director for the Vancouver studio at Cognizant Softvision. I've been designer for over 10 years, and I've been with Cognizant Softvision for over 4 years now. As you can tell by my intro slide, I'm a big fan of Marvel. And with a 7-year-old son, I've just kind of been reliving my childhood through him. So yeah, my role involves a lot of client contact, meeting with them, educating them about design and our team's process, and helping them utilize design to be more strategic within their business and organization. I also kind of help the clients scope the projects and determine which phase we should kind of start on. So today, I'm going to kind of share how our team utilizes Design Sprint, where it sits in the design process, and the tools that we use, and hopefully some tips and tricks that you're going to be able to use if you're interested in running your very own design sprint. Unfortunately, we won't be able to go into all the details just due to the time that we have, but I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to point you in the right direction and give you a sense if a design sprint is actually the right thing to do for you. So before I dig into what a design sprint is and why we would run them, let's kind of see where it sits in our overall process. At Cognizant Softvision, we kind of deal in a more almost consulting and agency type environment when we're engaging with some of our projects. So usually we're kicking off a new project or product or a new service. And so for us, design sprints tend to happen in the beginning of our process, near the product definition phase. Whereas more product-led companies could use design sprints in different phases or in many different areas. And for them, it's usually used to kind of iterate on a current product or testing out kind of new ideas. So in both environments, you'll see that design sprints are used to prioritize, test, and really validate solutions. So what you see on this slide is just kind of a high-level view of what our product design process looks like from conception all the way to implementation. And it all starts with the ideas. A lot of our clients will come to us with a project in mind, but there are occasions where we are going to be asked to be more strategic and help them prioritize ideas that would make great candidates for future workshops in the phases to come. So once an idea is selected, we also run something we call a problem framing workshop. And the goal of that one is just to kind of align everyone on what the problem is and what value it brings to the organization or business. There's no solutioning that happens just yet in that phase. Our goal then is just to kind of ensure that everyone is on the same page and that we have the current capabilities within the team to kind of handle that project. If not, we're going to have to define what those challenges are and requirements, and we need to address that before we can move forward. We would then kind of start to prepare for the design sprint, and we would start off by doing some initial research. Some of those activities might include kind of a competitive analysis or stakeholder interviews. And that's just getting a better sense of how we can tailor the design workshops to come to be more customized for what that need is and what the goal is that we're trying to achieve. So this is more for the design team's benefit than it is our clients, but they are going to be the ones that reap the rewards at the end. So we're going to kind of talk about the design sprint. And before we get into that, why should companies even invest in design sprints? Why don't we just jump straight into implementation if we already gathered the requirements? So this is kind of like a frequent question that I get from clients or from other people that haven't gone through a design sprint process. And research has shown that design thinking frameworks such as UX research and design sprints can lead to almost a 75% reduction in the delivery time. So the ultimate goal of a design sprint is that validation. So even if you think you know what that final goal or deliverable of that product should be, you can still spend the time it would take for a design sprint to validate that. Or you can wait until the project is completed 8 months or a year later, and find out if it worked out. And we don't really want to get to that point. We want to make sure that the project has a solid foundation, that it's headed in the right direction. And a design sprint allows us to kind of test those risky ideas and validate it against real users to kind of confirm that hypothesis. So we've kind of covered, the when and why we should invest in design sprints. So let's take a deeper look at what a design sprint actually is. So Design Sprint was founded by Google. It was used to kind of accelerate, the decision making and reduce risk in strategic projects. It's really just a framework that we use for answering critical business questions through design, prototyping, design thinking, and kind of testing those ideas with users. One of the great things about a design sprint is the structure itself. You can see that it can be essentially broken down into these 4 phases. The first phase being to kind of understand and define the problem, sketch and decide on a potential solution, prototyping, so making that idea come to life, and then test and validate, testing it against real users and getting feedback and knowing if we're moving in the right direction, if we're answering the right questions. So we'll dive into each phase in the coming slides. But one thing that we want to kind of address as well is there's kind of a new climate that we find ourselves in, and design sprints have kind of been broken up into in-person versus remote. The design sprint has definitely evolved several times since its inception. Originally, a design sprint was a 5-day intensive workshop in person. We'd gather everyone into the same room, everyone kind of sit for a couple of 8-hour days and just work through the problem. And I've seen it evolve since then into 4-day in-person workshops, and of course, in our current climate, fully remote. So in the future, I can imagine as travel opens up and we're able to have more FaceTime, we're going to see a hybrid approach. And there's kind of pros and cons to executing a design sprint in person, versus remote. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of explaining those, and then we'll dive into more detail about the design sprint activities. So what are the pros and cons of an in-person workshop? Well, the biggest pro, I think, is the face-to-face interaction. I think that's going to be key. Being able to read somebody's body language and how people are reacting to the conversations, ideas that are being thrown out is going to be kind of essential. And we try to do that, with remote by asking people to make sure that they turn their videos on so that we can at least read kind of facial cues. Collaboration is also much easier in person. Just multiple people can have kind of almost side discussions or conversations. And we can also physically interact with the sticky notes. It's just something about that analog touch and feel that we just can't replicate in a digital environment. And then you being able to kind of see the whole bigger picture, having all those sticky notes placed on a whiteboard and then physically moving it around just lets your brain kind of almost kind of catalog it on its own. And then there's also the ambiance. We can play music during some of the working sessions, have healthy snacks and coffee to keep everyone alert, and just kind of set a tone and mood to be more conducive for creativity. The biggest cons for an in-person workshop is going to be digitalizing all those sticky notes and trying to read everyone's handwriting. For all of those that have been to, or participate in design sprint workshops, that the design team has to kind of spend a couple of minutes at the end of each activity, taking photos of all the sticky notes on the whiteboard and trying to read some of that messy handwriting so that we can, digitalize all those findings and do a better analysis of it post-workshop. So for remote, some of the pros: documentation is much easier. So no messy handwriting to kind of transcribe or photos that need to be taken. And then travel also really isn't required. You don't have to all meet in the same area or same space or same time zone. People can attend in their PJs and be comfortable. And it's just easier to kind of gain everyone's focus. There's going to be whiteboarding tools that we're using as a digital software that is going to allow everyone to be focused on the specific activity. So we can actually focus everyone's vision and narrow down what problem we want to be addressing at that time. And then one of the other pros is there's also going to be more time for the team. We have to break up the workshops into smaller timeframes, and spreading it out across several weeks instead of one full intensive week is just going to give us more time to kind of digest some of the information that we've taken in, take more time designing the prototypes. So that's kind of a pro for us. The cons, so there's Zoom fatigue and distractions. People can't just sit and stare at a monitor for 8 hours and keep focused at all times. There's going to be distractions in their household or their space where they're working that will just kind of crop up as they're trying to listen in on these workshops. You can have the postman kind of deliver something and ring your doorbell, or you could have a pet kind of jump up on you, or a child walk into the room. So those distractions are definitely going to be real and something that will have to be managed and accounted for during your workshops. It's also harder to facilitate group discussions. When you're doing it remotely, there's only one person to kind of talk at a time. So it's definitely going to be harder for participants to chime in, especially if they aren't familiar with technology. They're just a little bit more reluctant. And it's easier for them to be kind of fade into the background, and let kind of the loudest voice in the room do all the talking. So we definitely want everyone to be engaged during these workshops. So that's something that we should try to be aware of as well when workshops are happening remotely. So what goes on within the design sprint? I'm actually not going to prescribe like a timeline for each day or how it should be run. As we just covered, you're most likely be conducting these workshops remotely for kind of the foreseeable future. So, in the previous slides, we talked about the 4 different phases. So we're just going to run through some of the activities that go through in each of these phases, and you can kind of adjust and customize for your needs as we go on. So the first phase we're going to talk about is the understand and define phase. And some of the activities that will be covered in the understand phase is basically the introduction. So just making sure everyone in the room knows each other and what their role is. You'll kind of be surprised when you run some of the design sprints. There's some people internally to their company that they've actually never met face-to-face before. So this is kind of a good chance for them to meet one another, know what each other's role is and what their responsibilities are. We'll also go over kind of the workshop overview, which is basically agenda for not only today's workshop, but the following workshops to come, so that everyone is aware and knows what the expectations are of them. We have how might we's, which are note-taking. It's a note-taking technique that we're going to use, and lightning talks. So lightning talks are when we're really just listening to the subject matter experts kind of share their point of view on the topic or the problem that we're trying to solve. And what we're looking for is pain points that need to be addressed. So as we're listening, we're using that note-taking technique, which is called the how might we's. And it's just really participants simply rephrasing known challenges as a question, beginning with how might we. So instead of people kind of writing down notes, and it could be negative or positive, we're trying to turn those notes into opportunities that we see, and keeping it open-ended so that when we look back at these notes later on, we can use them as kind of idea generation. So during workshops, you want to be actively taking notes, even though you're facilitating or you're part of the internal team that is helping to manage the participants. You want to make sure that you're actively taking notes and placing up how might we's onto sticky notes, whether it's digitally or physically onto a whiteboard. You'll set yourself up as a good role model for others to follow, and hopefully the participants will start to follow suit. If you notice, and this happens it's pretty common, that the first lightning talk, and there's a very low level of engagement, you want to take a step back and explain how might we's again, and give everyone a chance, like right there and then, to kind of think about what the previous speaker had just shared, and then quickly jot down some how might we's on the spot, and then start to place them up on the whiteboard. Just going through this simple exercise at the beginning, I find just ups the level of engagement throughout the workshop, and they'll be more open to giving ideas or taking notes. And the more information that we can kind of gather in this phase, the better. So in the define phase, the how might we's have kind of sparked some of the ideas, and voting on these will kind of help the group focus and prioritize what those ideas should be. So the end of the define phase will be when the group has kind of settled upon a sprint goal and has selected some success metrics to kind of go by. So if you're conducting a design sprint remotely, you're going to want to assign homework to the group before the next workshop. Have them kind of prep a link to anything they've seen internally or externally to the company that kind of inspires them in regards to the project. For example, a lot of people always say they want to be the Amazon of this or the Uber of this. So, specifically picking parts that you see in the industry or outside of that or industry of what you really liked about that feature. So if it's something that you really liked about Amazon and had to do with, I don't know, prime shipping, for example, what part of that did you specifically like, and why would it be something that you want to kind of replicate in your current project. Okay, this is my personal favorite phase, the sketch and decide. This workshop is just all about ideas and creativity. We're going to go broad and ask for any ideas, no matter how silly or unfeasible. And we'll slowly start to narrow it down and kind of bring it back into reality. But we want to make sure that all the ideas are kind of thrown out there and that we can see that. And, you know, it might start to spark another way of creating a solution for another idea. So we want to start by mapping the current user journey. So this gives everyone a clear idea of what the base is, what's the baseline, where are we starting, and it also points out, hopefully, friction or challenges that need to be solved. So at this time, I also like to remind everyone of what that sprint goal is so that they can have that in the back of their mind as they're going through the solution. And then if you remember the homework that we assigned everyone, which was to kind of find inspiration, those are what we call the lightning demos. Each participant is going to be able to kind of get to share the inspiration that they found. And this should help get everyone's creative juices flowing in. It's the perfect prime for the next exercise. They're gonna have this. They would have seen the ideas and hopefully sparked, you know, their own ideas for the solution sketch. And this is where everyone, and I mean, if you can get everyone involved on this one, that's going to be key. We want everyone to kind of draw their idea or solution that they have in mind. And we're not asking for, you know, the next Picasso or anything like that. If you have participants that refuse to draw, they can't even draw a stick man, then they can still write out what they want their idea to be. And at the end of the exercise, you know, each participant is going to be able to share their sketch and explain their idea. And here's where the collaboration kind of really kicks in. As people are sharing, they're going to be able to kind of take one part of somebody's solution and merge it with another or merge it with their own. And then the team as a whole is going to be able to kind of vote on which ideas they would like to move forward with. And that doesn't mean that all the ideas that weren't voted on were not good. It just means for this workshop specifically, we want to focus on a specific goal. And that's why you want to remind them in the beginning about what that sprint goal is. The other ideas could be placed into the backlog for future exploration. And of course, all these whiteboard sessions should be also digitalized and captured. So all of that information is still there to be processed in further workshops later on. So on to prototyping. In this phase, we kind of already have a solution in mind, and we're just getting ready to create that prototype to test against real users. So before we even start designing it and starting the prototype, we really want to talk about creating what we call the golden path. This is very similar to what the user journey map was, but this time it's for the ideal state or the current or future state of the product, I should say. We want to take the sketches that were done in the previous exercise to kind of help map out the golden path and start to storyboard what each step of the journey would look like from beginning to end. And this will give the designers on the team really good information because they're going to know exactly what they have to design for each step and be able to kind of mock up a realistic prototype for usability testing, whether it's an app or a service or whether it's on your phone or on a website. This will kind of give the team a good idea of what to design, and everyone will be kind of on board and know what to expect of the prototype, and there shouldn't be really any big surprises there. So as the design team is creating the prototype, the client team needs to be busy recruiting and scheduling users for the usability testing sessions. And once the prototype is ready, the team will be able to kind of test each of these prototypes with real users to get feedback that are going to validate if we're heading in the right direction. And the prototype stage is where I really see kind of the client's eyes light up. You know, they see their ideas kind of form into reality, or like right before their eyes. And you know, what was once a sketch on a little sticky note has kind of turned into like a realistic looking app or product in a matter of days, and they get really excited. It's just kind of like seeing their baby kind of grow up, right? And now we're going to be able to test it against, you know, real users and get some real life feedback on how it works. So we're going to get criticism and we're going to get some hopefully positive feedback, and we'll know how to move on after that. So once we've collected all the feedback and digitalized the information from the workshops, we're going to want to review our findings with the client team. Did we receive positive feedback and our ideas were validated? Or did we miss the mark completely and we need to pivot? Either way, the design sprint has kind of confirmed that you're either moving in the right direction or it's prevented us from building a product or service that users didn't need. And it didn't take us 8 months, or a year to figure out. So all that information is going to be really valuable, and how the client team or how we as a team decide to pivot, it's going to be a kind of a group discussion again and a consensus of what to do next. So now that you kind of have a general idea of what a design sprint is, how would you run one? First, you're going to need a team. And second, you're also going to need time. The first 2 phases of the design sprint is where we're really going to need a commitment from the client team. We're going to be heavily reliant on their domain knowledge. We're definitely not going to be experts in their field. So we want to make sure that everyone is super clear, that everyone that is involved needs to have that commitment of time as well. They can't be attending for like the first hour, dropping the next, and then coming back at the end. There's just things that are going to be missed. And all the activities in the design sprint are meant to build upon the next. So you kind of start to see a snowball effect as we're moving through. And we definitely don't want to take too much time re-explaining what has gone on before or summarizing, what the last day's workshop activities and results were, to the people that might have missed certain hours of the day. So, of course, emergencies do arise. And if that happens, they can always assign proxies that could attend the workshops on their behalf, or we can just reschedule the workshops as a whole. There's always things that we can do to kind of mitigate. But we want to make sure for the most part that everyone is aware of the time commitment that's involved, and they are, understanding of that and can kind of give us that time, which is usually the hard part. So building the team itself, sprint teams really need a good mix of different personalities and skills. You're going to want to assemble a really kind of balanced team that can be fully committed to the process, as I kind of talked about before. We try to have a team no larger than 7 or 8. And, a lot of times you'll see the client try to push for more than that. But the activities that we have in each of these workshops, usually they're time boxed, right? And having more participants just means that there's going to be more time needed for each of these activities, especially when they're sharing their results or talking about the findings that they've been able to, research or look up. So we want to make sure we're aware of the time that people are giving, and we want to make sure that everyone also has a chance to kind of share their findings. So the optimal team, and again, this can kind of fluctuate and be customized based on your needs, but we found that a product owner or the super voter / decider person is really key. We want the subject matter expert, and this is the user's voice. They understand the users best. They kind of know the product in and out. And then we want somebody from the technical side, so the engineer. So this person will be aware of the tech stack, what kind of technologies are obviously involved in the product, whether it's going to be feasible, and give us kind of that reality check. The marketing team, so this one we found usually is substituted with another subject matter expert if needed. But for the design team, sometimes they're quite valuable because they know the brand really well. They know the taxonomy and the language that the users might also be familiar with. So when designers are mocking up the prototype, we can make sure that the look and feel it also matches the brand. And a marketing person or somebody within that department would be very useful. And then, so that's basically the roles that we would need from the client side. For us internally, those that are running the workshop or leading the workshop, we're going to need that facilitator. So this could be a product designer or a product manager, depending on who has that skill set. We would need a product designer to do the design and prototyping. and then a product manager for documentation and getting all the feature requirements that are going to be needed to kind of move the project forward after the workshop. So they'll be in charge of some deliverables like the roadmap and feature documentation. Okay, honestly, I just found this image and I really wanted to throw it into a slide because it kind of matched what was going on. But realistically, you know, although it happens rarely, we have seen a lot of conflict arise internally between teams. So as I stressed earlier, like we really need commitment of time. And the one person that we can't have missing in the workshop is this super voter. It's the product owner or it's a sponsor of the project. They will have a good understanding of what that bigger picture is. And they're going to be aware of other factors that could impact the project that we are not aware of. So they have the power to kind of veto or prioritize ideas, even if the entire team votes in the opposite direction. There's been times where everyone has kind of voted on one thing and the super voter, you know, either didn't make a decision or didn't try to veto anything. And then we found out later on that one of the C-suite, like the CEO, really wanted to go in an opposite direction. And that's information that we shouldn't have missing in these workshops, and that needs to be called out much earlier before we go into any type of design or ideation or prototyping phase. Okay, so we've talked about the team. So let's kind of discuss the tools that you're going to need. So this is more specifically geared towards a remote workshop. You could find a checklist easily by looking at some of the resource links that I'll provide later on. But you're definitely going to need a video conferencing tool. For us, we use Zoom, but if you want to run it on Teams or Google Chat or anything like that, that could still work as well. We like to use Miro for the digital whiteboarding, but we've seen people use kind of Envision Freehand or even Mural as an alternative. Miro, we think, is just really a good tool for us. It allows us to kind of bring focus to the activities that we're working on. We can kind of block out certain templates so that we don't have people trying to skip ahead and work on things when we're not ready to. And yeah, and for internal communication, we obviously like Slack, but again, whatever communication tool your team uses or org uses, that's still something that's doable. This will help us as a team kind of communicate and keep track of where the flow of the workshop is going. And then for user testing, we like to use Loom. But again, there's a lot of alternatives out there that can also be used. But category-wise, I think you definitely need a video conferencing tool, a digital whiteboarding tool, communication tool, and user testing tool to just record all the sessions that are going on and capture all that feedback so that we can start to document and analyze it for the review sessions that we'll have with the clients. And I've listed some resources here. One of the key ones obviously is going to be the Sprint book. So I think one of the authors is Jake Knapp, who's kind of the founder of the Google Design Sprint methodology. So it's a good read, and it will definitely give you a lot of information on how to run the activities that I've quickly kind of highlighted in the phases. And yeah, so those are the tools that you're going to need. We now have kind of assembled a team. So we really want to kind of hope for the best, but we also want to be prepared for the worst. So let's talk about some, tips and tricks that will kind of help you run a design sprint. I think one of the big things is kind of just focus on three, big things here: asking questions, taking a lot of notes, and just minding the clock, because you want the activities time boxed, and you want to make sure that you have enough time to run through each of these activities. Not to say that if you do take more time on other things that you can't recover. There's going to be opportunities for you to kind of evaluate the end of each workshop and think about how you can make up for some lost time if that does happen. But at its core, you really want to try to make sure that your facilitation is simple, that people are asking questions to get information out in the open, and you really want to make sure that you're taking notes of all of that. making sure that questions are written down properly and that they're legible if it's in person, and that you're kind of going through the steps and not having people feel too overwhelmed, and make sure you're focused on kind of the basics. So here's a couple more tips and tricks here. You want to do your due diligence. As you kind of saw in the earlier slides for our product design process, design sprints are actually kind of at the latter half of the product definition phase. We don't try to jump straight into it. There's going to be research that needs to be done, and that's going to help kind of prepare us by, prepping the templates in the workshop ahead of time by filling in information or even writing down some sticky notes that will kind of get people more focused and to keep conversations really flowing. And the second one, again, is try to limit your distractions. Again, I realize that, people at home, there's just some things that they can't avoid. But whether in person or remote, you want to ask that people try to remove as many distractions as possible so that they can just be present and focused on the workshops. So that might mean turning your phones on vibrate or off, making sure that you're in a good space, that you have, snacks or water, available to you so that you don't have to feel hungry or kind of walk up and grab many of those items. So yeah, just having them be present and focused. And one that's really important is no acronyms. Every organization has their shortcuts, and it's not going to be obvious to the facilitators or the design team for sure. So you want to avoid acronyms and have the client team kind of explain it if it's used in conversation. And each time they use an acronym, you have to kind of point it out as soon as it happens, just so that you either discourage further use of it or you yourself start to get familiar with the acronym and you have that memorized. And again, respect the time. Each activity is going to be time boxed to kind of keep momentum and ensure that we have time to go through all of the activities. So for Myra, for example, we usually have a clock running that is viewable to everyone, and they can see how much time they have to either share or how much time they have left in order to kind of finish off an activity. So this also ensures that everyone gets their chance to kind of share and speak, and that we're not just forgetting about certain activities because of something as simple as time. So we want to make sure we're good on that front. So time management is definitely key. Yeah, no dumb questions. Be a good role model for participants. Make sure you're writing down a lot of notes and asking questions as needed, because at the beginning of the workshop, I usually explain that we're definitely not the experts in this field. They are the ones that hold all the domain knowledge. So setting that kind of precedent in place will let them know that you're going to be asking a lot of questions, and then you're going to be putting your notes down onto a sticky note or something digital where everyone can kind of see what you're asking. So if people are, either wondering about the same thing, they can kind of chime in, or if somebody knows the answer, they might be able to kind of post the answer onto your sticky notes if it's done digitally, or address that later if it's, in person. Build relationships. So this is one that's key as well. You want to get to know your stakeholders before the workshops. This definitely helps to build engagement and gives you an idea of who to call out if a conversation stalls or if you're looking for a decision. If it's a decision, it's usually going to be, your super voter or your decider, the product owner. And then if it's kind of like a question for either a technical person or the subject matter expert, you know to call on them and have them try to keep the conversation moving and also to provide their expertise on the topic. You also want to be able to set the mood. So again, this is what we were talking about in one of the later slides about ambiance, like keeping the mood light during workshops. We want to focus on really creativity and collaborating. So healthy snacks and drinks definitely help. And if you're doing it remote, I think 90 minutes is really the pee break limit. So make sure you have a break scheduled every 90 minutes at the very least for people to kind of take a quick stretch or a water break. And then here's the last one that I think is really important, and that's just listening. Be sure to listen, really intently. Don't assume you know everything, because you obviously won't in this case. And the goal is just to understand what the participants are saying and also why they are saying it. So you're listening for patterns, any mismatches, and calling that out right away, or writing that down in your notes or a sticky note so that it can be addressed at a later stage and you don't interrupt the flow of the speaker. So those are my kind of tips and tricks on design sprints. And yeah, I think right now I'm just gonna open it up to kind of Q&A, because I know I've gone through a lot of things, and um, happy to kind of take your questions and address anything that you might want to dive into more detail on. All right. All right. Sounds like I was pretty clear and there wasn't a lot of questions, but yeah, we'll definitely share the links out with the resources. So if anyone's interested, please feel free to check those out. And if you have any questions, you can also kind of email me, and we can have further discussion on this topic. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of Programmers Week.